And now on BBC One, with the time at 6:25, we go to the newsroom. And Moira Stuart.
The headlines this evening: hopes of a compromise on the Gulf crisis talks. Iraqi reports suggest the Americans could go to Baghdad on January the 6th. Shops risk prosecution to beat the recession and boost Christmas sales. And the ANC's ultimatum to the South African government: reform or we won't talk. Good evening. In the row between Washington and Baghdad over the cancellation of peace talks, Iraq has blamed President Bush for using threats and intimidation. The Iraqi foreign minister should have been on his way to America today, but his trip was called off because the two sides disagreed over the timing of the US Secretary of State's return visit to Iraq before the UN's mid-January deadline for withdrawal from Kuwait. But in Baghdad tonight, there are suggestions that there could be a compromise date.
Mr. Aziz may not be going to Washington tomorrow, but he still plans to go to Rome on Wednesday to see the Italians, who currently hold the presidency of the European Commission. Deftly, when he met a visiting German politician, he blamed the disagreement over dates on President Bush.
I don't know what his intentions are behind this squabbling about the date. We don't know. From the very beginning, we had our suspicions about his intentions, because immediately after making that suggestion, he resorted to harsh, tough statements. He, his Secretary of State and his Secretary of Defense, and they were using means of intimidation and threats, which are totally unacceptable to Iraq. We are not going to get engaged in talks with the Americans in such an atmosphere.
But now the Iraqis are starting to hear reports that Washington may suggest Secretary of State Baker should come here on January the 6th, 3 days later than the Americans were originally proposing. That sounds like horse trading, and the Iraqis are distinctly interested. Yet as daily life goes on, they're about to start the 3:15 race at the Baghdad horsemanship ground, for instance. It's hard to recall that in just a month's time, the Americans and their allies could be attacking Baghdad. Few people here believe that. They too put their trust in horse trading. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
The former Prime Minister, Edward Heath, is to tell the United States Armed Services Committee why he believes there's an alternative to war in the Gulf. He's the only foreigner to be invited to testify. In Saudi Arabia, the officer in charge of British ground forces took over his command today.
The Desert Army grows, the British now fielding a full division, 1st Armoured, with its General Rupert Smith on a tour of inspection today. The Scots already here welcomed him, and as Christmas approaches, several thousand more men and shiploads of equipment will arrive, continuing into January.
The Armoured Division will all be here and ready to fight early in January, and we will go on getting better and better at it the longer we stay here and practice and train.
And fighting is the talk of American senators watching the US troop reinforcements, which are now coming in round the clock.
My sense is that the prospects of war are greater than they were 2 weeks ago, in large part because of the way in which Hussein is using the meeting as a form of manipulation rather than serious discussion.
If the ultimatum goes through, we will have to back it up. And I think the president will have to back up his words.
With talk of war, the desert resounds with firing. But as the British artillery of 40th Field Regiment train day after day, there's emphasis that this is to be ready for whatever eventuality. General Smith observed that other people start wars, not the soldiers standing in the desert. Kate Adie, BBC News, Saudi Arabia.
The Confederation of British Industry is renewing its call for a further cut in interest rates to help companies survive the recession. In a report out tomorrow, it's expected to warn that prospects for industry will remain bleak well into the summer.
Industrial output is, according to government figures, falling at its fastest rate for 9 years. And the CBI's latest survey is expected to indicate that the recession will get even worse in the new year and continue well into the summer. Joining the ERM, tying the pound to other European currencies, has reduced the government's ability to help industry by cutting interest rates.
The damage of cutting interest rates prematurely is the damage of creating false hopes, a false dawn. The real economy in the United Kingdom does need a reduction in interest rates, but it doesn't need it until we can be absolutely sure that that is soundly based.
But industry is warning that by the summer, over 2 million people could be out of work.
Government claims that the recession will be shallow and short-lived. I do not accept that. I think all the indicators show that we're going to have a very serious time in 1991 with falling output, falling investment and rising unemployment. It will last for most of the year, I fear.
Arriving back in Downing Street this afternoon, John Major needed no reminding that the government's handling of the recession will be his real test. Last Wednesday, the Chancellor, Norman Lamont, acknowledged that the economic slowdown was more serious than previously admitted, and the Employment Secretary, Michael Howard, says